I'm Mark, 30M, and a few weeks ago, I proposed to my girlfriend of almost 5 years, Emily, 28F. I thought it would be the happiest day of our lives so far, but it turned out to be one of the most confusing and heartbreaking moments I've ever experienced. Now, I'm sitting here, questioning everything about our relationship and trying to make sense of how we got here. Emily and I met through a mutual friend at a small dinner party. She was charming, quick-witted, and had this laugh that made me smile without even realizing it. We clicked right away. Over the years, our connection grew naturally. We weren't perfect, but we worked well together. We talked about marriage, kids, even joked about what kind of dog we'd get when we moved out of our cramped apartment. She used to send me pictures of rings she liked, point out venues when we drove past a scenic spot, and once even made a Pinterest board full of wedding ideas. It wasn't obsessive, just fun and lighthearted, but enough to make me feel like we were on the same page. This year, as we approached our 5-year anniversary, I decided it was time. I'd been saving up for months, and I wanted to do it right. I reached out to my best friend, Tyler, and my sister, Hannah, for advice. Tyler helped me pick out the ring, a simple but elegant design Emily had once shown me on her phone. Hannah suggested we make it a little more special by involving Emily's 2 best friends, Rachel and Lily, so they could be part of the celebration afterward. Emily had always talked about wanting to visit this cozy lakeside resort a few hours away. It was a bit pricey, but I booked us a weekend there, figuring it was worth it for such a big moment. Tyler and I planned the proposal down to the smallest detail. Dinner by the water, candles, music, flowers. Her friends would arrive right after I popped the question, champagne in hand, ready to celebrate. It felt perfect. On the day of the proposal, everything seemed to fall into place. Emily was in a great mood, and we spent the day hiking, exploring the little shops in town, and laughing like we hadn't in weeks. I couldn't stop looking at her, thinking about how lucky I was. She had no idea what was coming, but every time she smiled at me, it felt like a confirmation that I was doing the right thing. That evening, I got dressed in a way I knew she liked. Clean shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up. She wore this flowy blue dress that I loved, and I couldn't stop staring at her. When we arrived at the setup, it was like a scene out of a movie. The water shimmered in the fading light, candles flickered around the table, and soft music played in the background. Emily's eyes lit up when she saw it. "This is beautiful," she whispered, squeezing my hand. We sat down, and I could barely eat, too nervous to enjoy the meal. My heart was pounding, and I kept second-guessing my timing. When dessert came out, I decided it was now or never. I took her hand, stood up, and pulled her to her feet. She looked confused at first but didn't resist. "Emily," I started, my voice shaking a little, "you mean everything to me. You've made me a better person in so many ways, and I can't imagine my life without you. I want us to build a future together, to have the life we've always talked about." Then I got down on one knee, pulled out the ring, and asked, "Will you marry me?" For a moment, I thought she might cry. Her eyes went wide, and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She just stood there, frozen. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. I could feel the people nearby, our waiter, the other guests, watching us, and I became hyper-aware of how quiet it was. Finally, she said, "Mark, I don't know." I stared up at her, not fully processing what she just said. "You don't know?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, looking pained. I need more time. I'm not ready for this." It felt like my heart had dropped into my stomach. I stood up slowly, slipping the ring back into my pocket, and tried to keep it together. "Okay," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "Okay." Emily reached for my hand, her eyes full of regret. "It's not a no," she said quickly. "I swear it's not. I wasn't expecting this, and I need to think." Our friends, who had been waiting nearby with champagne, stayed out of sight. Tyler later told me they'd seen everything from a distance and decided not to come over. Probably for the best. The night was ruined, and I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of embarrassment and rejection. The car ride back to the cabin was silent. I stared out the window, replaying everything in my head, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Emily sat next to me, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, occasionally glancing my way like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. When we got back to the room, she tried to explain herself again. "Mark, it's not that I don't love you," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I do. But this is such a big step, and I need time to process it. It's not about you. It's me." That line felt like a knife to the chest. "We've talked about this for years," I said quietly. "You've sent me links to rings. You've talked about wedding venues. How are you not ready?" "I thought I was," she admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "But now that it's real, I don't know. I'm scared." "Scared of what?" I asked, my frustration seeping through. "Of being with me?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It's not that. She broke off, her voice cracking. "I don't know, Mark. I'm sorry." I didn't say anything else. I didn't know what to say. We went to bed that night without touching, without even looking at each other. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to understand how the person I thought I knew better than anyone could feel like a stranger in a single moment. The days after the proposal were some of the most uncomfortable and confusing of my life. Emily acted as though nothing had happened, but it was impossible for me to ignore the weight of what had gone down. She'd smile at me in the morning, ask about my day, and even suggest we cook dinner together, but everything felt forced, like she was trying to distract me or smooth things over without actually addressing what happened. I played along for a while, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. Every time I thought about bringing it up, I felt this knot in my stomach, like I wasn't ready to hear what she might say. I hadn't told anyone outside of Tyler and Hannah about how the proposal went, and even they were careful not to push me. Tyler checked in with a casual, "You good?" here and there, and Hannah called once, but I dodged her questions with vague responses. I wasn't ready to admit to my family that the big moment I'd been hyping up for months had ended in, I don't know. It felt humiliating. After a few days of pretending, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't directly involved, someone who could give me some perspective. So, I called Hannah. She's my older sister and has always had a no-nonsense way of looking at things. If anyone could help me untangle this mess in my head, it was her. As soon as she picked up, she could tell something was off. "Mark, what's going on? You've been weirdly quiet lately." I sighed, gripping the phone tightly. "I proposed to Emily," I said, my voice flat. For a moment, there was silence on the other end, and then her tone shifted. "Okay, and? What happened?" "She said she wasn't ready," I admitted, the words tasting bitter as I said them out loud. "She didn't say no, but she didn't say yes either. She said she needs more time." Hannah let out a sharp breath. "Wow. Okay. That's not what I was expecting." "Yeah, tell me about it," I muttered, pacing my living room. "We've been together for 5 years, Hannah. 5. We've talked about getting married, kids, everything. How can she not be ready?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But Mark, if she wasn't ready, why didn't she tell you that before you proposed? It's not like this came out of nowhere." "That's what I've been trying to figure out," I said, running a hand through my hair. Did I miss something? Was she dropping hints and I just ignored them? Hannah was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that caught me off guard. "Mark, I don't want to upset you, but are you sure this is just about her not being ready? Sometimes when people hesitate like this, it's not because of the commitment. It's because there's someone or something else." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Someone else?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not saying she's cheating," Hannah said quickly, "but think about it. Has she been acting differently lately? More distant? Spending more time out with friends or at work? Anything like that?" I racked my brain, replaying the last few months. At first, nothing came to mind. Emily had always been pretty independent. She liked her space, and I respected that. But then I remembered the late nights at work, the new habit of keeping her phone face down on the table, the way she'd been going out with Rachel and Lily more often. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. I trusted her. But now, with Hannah's words in my head, it all felt suspicious. "She has been working late a lot," I admitted reluctantly, "and she's been spending more time with her friends." But that doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, she's allowed to have a life outside of me. Of course she is, Hannah said. But Mark, has she ever given you a reason to doubt her before? Be honest. I paused, thinking. No, she hadn't. Not in 5 years. But now, I couldn't tell if that was because there was nothing to doubt, or because I'd never been looking for a reason to doubt her. No, I said finally. She hasn't. Then don't jump to conclusions, Hannah said, her voice firm but gentle. But don't ignore your gut either. If something feels off, pay attention. People can only hide things for so long before they slip up. After we hung up, I felt worse than before. Hannah hadn't said anything I didn't already know deep down, but hearing it out loud made it feel more real. I sat on the couch, staring at the engagement ring I'd hidden back in its box. I couldn't believe I'd been so sure about proposing, only for everything to fall apart. The next day, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Emily was glued to her phone more than usual, and if I glanced at her screen, she'd lock it or flip it over almost instinctively. When I asked how her day had been, her answers were short and vague, like she didn't want to get into details. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining it, that I was just paranoid because of what Hannah had said. But the more I watched, the harder it became to ignore. Something was definitely off. That weekend, Emily told me she was meeting Rachel and Lily for brunch. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but now, my mind was racing. Was she really going to see them? Or was this just an excuse to be somewhere else? I hated that I was even thinking like this, but I couldn't stop myself. I felt like I was stuck in some awful limbo, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When she came home later, she seemed off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something in the way she avoided my gaze, the way she brushed past me with a mumbled, "Hey," before heading to the bedroom. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter, trying to decide if I should confront her or just let it go. Part of me wanted to believe her, to trust that everything was fine. But another part of me, the part that had been sitting in the pit of my stomach since the proposal, couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that things were far from fine. A couple of days after Emily came back from brunch, I decided I couldn't live with this constant doubt. It was eating me alive. I felt like I was looking at her through a warped lens, questioning every move she made. I wasn't proud of it, but I started noticing little things. How she was always texting but never saying who, or how her answers to casual questions about her day felt rehearsed, like she was sticking to a script. The tension between us had grown so thick it was impossible to ignore. We hadn't talked about the proposal since that night, but the silence around it was deafening. I kept wondering if she was waiting for me to bring it up, or if she hoped I'd just let it go and pretend it never happened. Neither option sat well with me. One evening, I came home from work, and Emily was sitting on the couch with her laptop. She looked up and gave me a weak smile. "Hey," she said. "How was your day?" "It was fine," I replied, setting my bag down. "Yours?" "Busy," she said, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. "Work's been crazy lately." I nodded, trying to act normal, but my stomach was churning. "Anything interesting happen?" I asked casually. She shrugged without looking up. "Not really. Just the usual meetings and deadlines." It was such a generic answer, the kind of thing you say when you don't want to get into details. My chest tightened, and I decided then and there that I couldn't keep tiptoeing around this. I needed answers. "Emily," I said, sitting down across from her. She looked up, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "We need to talk." Her fingers hovered over her laptop for a second before she closed it and set it aside. "Okay," she said, her voice cautious. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I can't keep pretending like everything is fine. It's not. Ever since the proposal, things have felt off, and I need to understand what's going on. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "I know," she said softly. "I've been feeling it too." "Then talk to me," I urged. "Tell me what's going on. Is it just about the proposal? Or is there something else?" Her eyes darted up to meet mine, and for a moment, I thought she was about to tell me the truth. But instead, she said, "It's not what you think, Mark. I've just been overwhelmed. Work has been stressful, and I feel like I've been under so much pressure lately, with everything. The proposal, our relationship, my friends asking me about the future. It's all just a lot. Her explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. It felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this conversation. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. If you were feeling all this pressure, why didn't you come to me? We're supposed to be a team, Emily. I didn't want to worry you, she said quickly. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I guess I didn't realize how much it was affecting us. I wanted to believe her, but my gut was screaming at me that there was more to this. And Tyler? I asked, watching her reaction closely. Where does he fit into all of this? Her face changed instantly. It was subtle, a flicker of something, maybe guilt or fear. But it was there. What about Tyler? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. I know you've been spending time with him, I said, keeping my voice steady. Hannah's friend saw you at that coffee shop. You never mentioned him until I brought it up, and now it feels like there's something you're not telling me. She sighed, leaning back against the couch. Mark, I told you already, Tyler is just a coworker. We're working on a project together, and sometimes we grab coffee to brainstorm. That's it. Then why didn't you tell me about him? I pressed. If it's innocent, why keep it a secret? I wasn't keeping it a secret, she said, her voice rising slightly. I just didn't think it was a big deal. Do I have to tell you about every single person I talk to at work? That's not the point, Emily, I said, my frustration bubbling over. The point is that you've been acting distant. You hesitated on the proposal, and now there's this guy who you conveniently never mentioned until I found out about him from someone else. Can you blame me for feeling like something's not right? She rubbed her temples, clearly frustrated. You're making this into something it's not, Mark. I love you. I'm with you. Tyler is just a coworker, and I've already explained why I needed time to think about the proposal. Can't you just trust me? I wanted to trust her. God, I wanted to trust her more than anything. But everything about this felt wrong. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if I believed her. Finally, I said, I'm trying, Emily. But you need to meet me halfway here. If there's something you're not telling me, now's the time to say it. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands again, her lips pressed tightly together. There's nothing else, she said eventually, but her voice was so quiet, it was almost a whisper. I nodded slowly, even though I didn't feel reassured. Okay, I said, but if I find out you've been lying to me, I don't think I can come back from that. Her head snapped up, and I saw something in her eyes. Panic, maybe? Regret? I'm not lying, she said quickly. I swear. I nodded again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me the whole truth. The conversation ended there, but the tension between us didn't go away. If anything, it felt heavier, like a storm cloud hanging over us, waiting to break. The days after that conversation were unbearable. Emily and I were barely speaking, and when we did, it was all surface-level chatter, nothing meaningful. The weight of unspoken things hung between us like a wall we both pretended wasn't there. I could see the strain in her, the way she'd avoid my gaze, or keep herself busy with random tasks to avoid being in the same room as me for too long. And honestly, I wasn't much better. Every time I looked at her, all I could think about was the lingering doubt in the back of my mind. Was she telling me the truth? One evening, I came home from work and found Emily in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. The smell of garlic and spices filled the air, and for a moment, it felt almost normal, like it used to. But as soon as she glanced over her shoulder and saw me standing there, her face changed. She gave me a small, tight-lipped smile and said, "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. I wanted to tell her we needed to talk again, but I held back. I was tired of pushing, tired of being the one who always had to bring things up. Instead, I just nodded and mumbled, "Okay," before heading to the living room. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Hannah. "Any updates? How are you holding up?" I glanced up at Emily, who was poking at her food without much interest, and quickly typed back, "Same as before. Still feels weird." Emily must have noticed me texting because she asked, "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, shoving my phone into my pocket. Just Hannah checking in. She nodded, but didn't say anything else. I wanted to ask her what was on her mind, to force the conversation we were both avoiding, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, we finished dinner in awkward silence, and I cleaned up while she disappeared into the bedroom. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through my phone, rereading Hannah's texts. My sister was always blunt, but she cared. She'd been telling me for weeks now that I needed to stop avoiding the obvious, that I deserved better than someone who wasn't fully committed. I knew she was right, but part of me still held on to the hope that Emily and I could fix this. Maybe if I gave her enough space, she'd come around. But then came the text that changed everything. It was almost midnight when my phone buzzed again. I thought it was Hannah, but when I picked it up, I saw a name I didn't recognize. The message said, "Hey, just wanted to say thanks for earlier. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow." Smiling face with smiling eyes. My stomach dropped. It wasn't meant for me. I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Then it hit me. Emily must have sent it by mistake. I got up and walked to the bedroom, my phone still clutched in my hand. Emily was lying on her side, facing away from the door, but I knew she wasn't asleep. Her breathing wasn't steady enough. "Emily," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She shifted slightly but didn't turn around. "What? Who were you texting just now?" I asked, holding the phone up. She froze, and I saw her shoulders tense. Slowly, she rolled over to face me, her expression wary. "What are you talking about?" "This," I said, holding up the message. "It's from you, Emily, but it's not meant for me. So who's it for?" Her face went pale, and she sat up, pulling the blanket around her like it could shield her from the confrontation. "Mark, it's not what you think." "Then explain it," I said, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're making plans with someone else." She looked down at her lap, her hands twisting in the fabric of the blanket. It's Tyler," she admitted quietly. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Tyler?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "Are you kidding me, Emily? After everything you said, after swearing there was nothing going on, you're texting him at midnight?" "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice desperate. "We've just been talking about work stuff. That's all." "Work stuff," I said bitterly. "At midnight? With emojis and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow? Are you serious right now?" She flinched, but I wasn't about to back down. "I trusted you," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Even when everything in my gut was telling me something was wrong, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. And now this?" "Mark, please," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I swear, it's not what it looks like. I've been feeling so overwhelmed lately, and Tyler's just easy to talk to. He listens. More than I do." I snapped. "Because I've been here, Emily. I've been right here. And instead of talking to me, you run to him?" She wiped at her eyes, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice cold. "You hurt me, Emily. You made me feel like I was the problem, like I was imagining things, when all along you've been building this, whatever it is with Tyler." "It's not a relationship," she said quickly. "I don't even know what it is. I'm confused." That word again, confused. I felt my anger shift into something heavier, something that felt a lot like grief. "You're confused," I said quietly. "About what? About me? About us?" She didn't answer, and in that moment, I realized I didn't need her to. The silence was enough. "I can't do this anymore," I said, standing up. "You need to figure out what you want, Emily. But I'm done waiting around for you to decide if I'm worth it." "Mark, please," she said, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "No," I said firmly. "I've given you every chance to be honest with me, and you've only given me half-truths and excuses. I deserve better than this." She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me, leaning against it as I tried to process what had just happened. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe, but the air tasted bitter. The next morning, The apartment felt unbearably quiet. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning on the couch while my mind replayed the argument from the night before. Emily stayed in the bedroom all night, and when I finally dragged myself up to make coffee, the door was still shut. For a second, I thought about knocking, but I stopped myself. What was I even going to say? I sipped my coffee in silence, staring out the window and trying to figure out my next move. Everything felt surreal, like my life had been flipped upside down in a matter of days. A part of me wanted to believe Emily, that it was just emotional confusion, that Tyler wasn't actually anything more than a sounding board for her stress. But the other part, the part that had been screaming at me for weeks now, knew better. She might not have crossed any physical boundaries, but the trust between us was already shattered. Eventually, Emily came out of the bedroom. Her eyes were puffy, and she looked like she hadn't slept much either. She hesitated in the hallway, as if deciding whether to come into the kitchen or turn around and hide. Finally, she walked in and sat down across from me at the table. "Hi," she said softly, her voice hoarse. I didn't answer right away, just took another sip of my coffee before looking at her. "Hi." She twisted her hands in her lap, avoiding my gaze. "I'm sorry about last night," she said quietly. "I know I hurt you, and I know I've been distant. I don't even know where to start." "Start with the truth," I said, my voice calm but firm. "For once, Emily, I need you to tell me everything. No half-truths, no trying to protect my feelings. Just be honest." Her hands tightened around the edge of her sweater, and for a moment, I thought she might not say anything. But then she nodded, taking a deep breath. "Okay," she said. "You're right. I haven't been honest. Not completely. And I'm sorry for that." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "It started a few months ago," she said, her eyes focused on the table. "Work was getting really overwhelming, and I felt like I couldn't keep up. I was stressed all the time, but I didn't want to bother you with it because, well, you seemed so focused on us, on planning for the future. I didn't want to bring you down." "That's your first mistake," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "We're supposed to be a team, Emily. If you couldn't talk to me about what you were going through, then what's the point?" She winced but nodded. I know that now. But back then, I felt like I couldn't. And then Tyler started talking to me more at work. At first, it was just small stuff. Projects, deadlines, jokes about how terrible the coffee in the break room is. But eventually, I started venting to him about my stress, and he listened. He didn't try to fix anything, didn't tell me what I should do. He just let me talk. "Something I could have done," I said sharply. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. "I know," she said again, her voice breaking. "I know, Mark. But I don't know why I didn't come to you. Maybe it's because I didn't want you to see me falling apart. Or maybe I was scared that you'd tell me what I already knew, that I was putting too much on myself." "That's not an excuse," I said. "You chose to go to him instead of me. You let him fill a role that should have been mine." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. "Not this time. It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, wiping at her face. "I never meant for it to get complicated. But the more I talked to him, the more, I don't know. It felt easy. Like I didn't have to explain myself because he already got it. And I know that's wrong, Mark. I know that now." "Do you?" I asked. "Because it doesn't sound like you do. It sounds like you're just sorry you got caught." She flinched, and I almost regretted saying it. "Almost. There's nothing romantic between us," she said quickly. "I swear. It's not like that." "Not yet," I said bitterly. "But you're on that road, Emily. And you didn't even bother to hit the brakes." Her face crumpled, and she started crying again. "I never wanted this to happen," she said. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to mess things up. I've been so confused, Mark. About everything. About us, about what I want, about myself. I don't know what's wrong with me." Her words felt like a slap in the face. "You're confused," I said flatly. "That's your explanation? After 5 years, you're confused? About what, Emily? Whether you love me? Whether you want to spend your life with me?" "No," she said quickly. "I love you, Mark. I do. But you're not sure I'm enough," I finished for her. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a bitter laugh. Wow, I said. 5 years, Emily. 5 years of building a life together, of making plans for the future. And now, when it's time to take the next step, you're confused. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then don't say anything, I snapped, standing up. Because I'm done. I'm done trying to pull answers out of you. Done trying to fix something you clearly don't even care about fixing. Mark, please, she said, standing up too. Don't do this. Don't give up on us. I'm not the one who gave up, I said coldly. You did that the moment you let someone else into our relationship. Whether it's romantic or not, you broke something between us. And I don't think it can be fixed. Her tears were falling fast now, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the kitchen and grabbed my coat, slamming the door behind me as I left. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there, in that apartment with her. As I walked aimlessly down the street, the cold air biting at my face, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. But beneath it all, there was a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't second-guessing myself. I knew where I stood, even if it hurt like hell. I didn't go far that night. I ended up sitting on a bench in the park a few blocks from the apartment, staring at the empty streets and letting the cold air clear my head. I didn't cry, though I felt like I should have. I think I'd already burned through every emotion I had. All that was left was exhaustion and the faintest sense of clarity. By the time I got back, the apartment was dark. Emily had gone to bed, or at least, she was pretending to sleep. I didn't bother checking. I grabbed a blanket and crashed on the couch, too drained to think about anything else. The next morning, she was already up when I woke. She stood in the kitchen, staring at a mug of coffee like it held all the answers she couldn't find. When she saw me, she looked like she was about to speak, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said. I've already made my decision. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. Maybe she already knew it was over. I'm going to stay with Tyler for a few days, I said. Not your Tyler. My Tyler. I need space, Emily. And you need to figure out what you really want. Mark, she started, but I cut her off. No, I said firmly. This isn't up for debate. I can't keep living like this, constantly wondering if I'm enough for you. If you don't know by now, you never will. Tears filled her eyes again, but she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I packed a bag and left within an hour. Tyler welcomed me with open arms, no questions asked, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It's been a week now. Emily texted me once to ask if we could talk, but I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure I want to. Maybe I'll forgive her someday, but right now, I need to focus on myself. I don't know where this is going, or if there's a future for us at all. But one thing I do know, I'm done being someone's second choice.